Hello, hello. All right, we can start. Good evening, everybody, or good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Hopefully, you can hear me. And we're going to start off today's Bible study, and we'll be doing something very deep, or I want to say this is going to be very beneficial. The book of Revelation is one book that is really, really avoided in many places because of how difficult for a lot of people it is to be able to understand the content of the book and also its application. There's been a lot of confusion around this topic for a long time. And recently, I started a series on Facebook, Understanding the Chapter 8 of Revelation. Been on this for a while now. This particular study for today, I actually have done this before, about 3 years ago, thereabouts. And I've covered from chapter 1. The only place I would meet her were the places where we have the letters to the churches. And for obvious reasons, I left that because I find that those ones much easier for people. Most people find that those areas much easier to understand. And so, but when it comes to the areas where we find a lot of symbolism and imageries, then it becomes very unclear what the book is saying. So today, we're looking at chapter 8. I may likely rush through the early parts because of how we started on Facebook. We have some people who have actually been following this teaching. And so I will just actually uh, move on from those places very quickly and move fast into the areas I've not covered. So let's begin. So in Revelation chapter 8, from verse 1, it says, when he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. And I saw the seven angels who stand before God, and to them were given seven trumpets. Then another angel, having a golden censer, came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints ascended before God from the angel's hand. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and threw it to the earth. And there were noises, thunderings, lightnings, and earthquake. Verse 8 says, so the seven angels who had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound. The first angel sounded, and hail and fire followed, mingled with blood, and they were thrown to the earth. And a third of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burnt up. Then the second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood. And a third of the living creatures in the seas died, and a third of ships were destroyed. Verse 10. Then the third angel sounded, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and the springs of water. The name of the star is wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many men died from the water because it was made bitter. Then the fourth angel sounded, and the third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, a third of the stars, so that a third of them were darkened, and the third of the day did not shine. Likewise the night. And I looked, and I heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, "Woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because of the remaining blasts of the trumpets of the three angels who are about to sound." All right, so let's go back to the first verse. You can see there's something I want to point out here, that in verse 3, there was another angel having a golden censer came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne of God. All right, we have more people coming in. Saul Bongo, David, welcome. All right, so he was given much incense so that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. I saw something here that just struck me. The prayers of the saints was offered with the censer by the angel. And if you have the idea of the Old Testament, you will realize that when it is offered, it brings up like a sweet smelling fragrance before God. And interestingly, here you find out that the prayers of the saints actually go ascend in a way that it becomes a sweet smelling fragrance before God. I want people to know that when each time we speak to God in prayer, that's the picture that depicts the situation, how we are before God. You know, whenever we communicate to Him, it's like a sweet smelling censer or sweet smelling fragrance that fills the room, fills the heavens. And so don't never let anyone make you feel like your prayer, before God is ordinary, weak, or maybe God is, this is not happy the way you're talking with Him. When you talk with Him in His presence, there's this joy, this atmosphere of sweetness when we talk with our God. All right, so we've gone through the first, I think, about 13 verses of this chapter 8. So we're going to quickly go through it. First and foremost, we saw that there was a silence in heaven for half an hour. Okay, and like I dealt with this on Facebook. Beginning in Nisan, that was when they started celebrating their Passover, the first month of the Jewish calendar, in somewhere around 66 AD. The Jewish events are actually supernaturally mirroring what you see in Revelation chapter 8 from verse 1 to 3. Okay, so on the eighth day, this is now a particular um, documentation by Josephus that on the eighth day of the month of Xantios, which is Nisan, and the ninth hour of the day, so great a light shone around the altar and the holy place that it appeared to be bright daytime, which lasted for half an hour. The silence in heaven was half an hour in Revelation chapter 8, which the angel also lights the incense before the altar. It corresponds with what happened on earth with the miracle of a light shining around the altar as documented by Josephus above. So as John saw it, these things were actually happening, exactly here on earth, especially in the center of attention, which is Jerusalem. Now, this is the key thing to understand the book of Revelation. Revelation 1, verse 1, it says the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants things which must shortly take place. And he sent and signified it by his angel to his servant John. So three key things here, three constituent elements. Number one, audience. Who are the audience? He said to show his servants. This servants here refers to the 7 churches in Asia. Then the time frame for this prophecy in this book, that it must shortly take place. And number 3, what is the methodology for this vision? Okay, and we see that it was given in signs. And so the things that are mostly communicated comes in across as signs for those who will read it. So this particular prophecy has its fulfillment with the blowing of trumpets, which is actually one of the feasts that the Jews celebrated back then. So the 7 angels of Revelation 8 take part in this special feast of trumpets, blowing their horns together with those of the Jewish rebels. The result being the worst war in history. Okay, so as we continue, I'd like us to please mute your mic so that we have the best of audience. So the 7 angels that blow the trumpet, it coincides with the Jewish celebration, Feast of Trumpets, and that was the same time that the Jewish rebels began the rebel against Rome, coming against them. Okay, I might have to mute. Okay. All right, so the Jewish rebels began a conflict against Rome back in those days, and they were trying to see how they could fulfill the prophecy of the Messiah redeeming them from the hands of the Jews, from the Romans. They thought Jesus Christ would be that Messiah because the idea they had about the Messiah was a political Messiah, one who would free them from the Romans and restore Israel back as a world power. So the idea of the kingdom of God for the Jews was about them becoming, reclaiming world dominion. Okay, so that was the idea that the Jews had. Unfortunately, they saw Jesus and they were quite disappointed that he was actually not preparing an army. He was not going about with a agenda to overthrow the Roman rule over them, but he was going up and down, healing the sick, raising the dead, touching the lame. It didn't come across to them as a Messiah. The concept they had of Messiah was defeated when they saw Jesus Christ, and so they were very much disappointed with what they were seeing in his life. And so when they came to decide, they had to choose between Barabbas and Jesus. They preferred Barabbas because Barabbas seemed to be fighting the cause that the Jews wanted, which was deliverance, physical deliverance, political deliverance. But Jesus was not actually looking like that picture. So 66 AD was remarkable in the sense that was when they began the conflicts. Revelation 8 describes the judgments resulting from the trumpet blast. So now, interestingly, as they were celebrating the Feast of Trumpets, the angels were at the same time blowing trumpets, but the blasting of trumpets was a series of battles and disasters that the Jewish people faced at the hands of the Romans prior to the siege of Jerusalem. So the bulk of the plagues that we see in that chapter 8 of Revelation were the result of different battles that were fought throughout the phases and seasons of the war, which culminated in the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. So the first thing we said is that the Jewish war began at the Feast of Trumpets, and the angels blew trumpets in heaven. Now, then when the trumpets were blown, we find out that plagues were now released. So the interesting thing is that each of the plagues is actually a reflection of the plagues we find in the book of Exodus. So the language of each plague is wrapped up in the language of Exodus. So Revelation gives us languages to interpret this prophecy, which will actually be easy to understand. If you go back into the Old Testament, you will see certain things that are similar. So whenever I talk about plagues in scriptures, one of the places you talk about mostly is the book of Exodus, okay? When you see how Israel moved away from Egypt. and a series of plagues hit them. In Deuteronomy 28, verse 58 to 60, we see when God told Israel, if you do not carefully follow all the words of this law, which are written in this book, and do not revere this glorious and awesome name, the Lord your God, the Lord your God will send fearful plagues on you and your descendants, harsh and prolonged disasters and severe lingering illnesses he will bring on you. All the disease of Egypt that you dreaded, they will cling to you. This was a prophecy that was given during the time of Moses upon a generation. Jesus came and said that that generation that he saw, that he lived in, was the most wicked generation. And it was actually a way of positioning them according to the scripture we are seeing in Deuteronomy 28:58. So, what were the prayers of the saints we see in Revelation chapter 8? The prayers mentioned there are actually a reflection of what we see in Luke 18:7-8, where it's written, and will not God bring upon justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice and they will get it quickly. So the the disciples and apostles went out preaching the gospel and the good news of the kingdom and about the new covenants. But just like Jesus said in Matthew 23, that instead of the Jewish leadership to receive them, they will take them, persecute them, kill them, and he now also said that vengeance will be upon them. And so the prayers of the saints in heaven were actually about vengeance, justice upon the Jewish leadership who actually eliminated them because they wanted to preserve the temple, they wanted to preserve the old covenant worship, and so they didn't mind to spill blood in that quest. So these prayers were for justice are actually mentioned in Revelation chapter 3, which is some chapters earlier, verse 9 to 10, when it says, when the Lamb broke the fifth seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and because of the testimony which they maintained. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, how long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on earth? Remember, Jesus gave a parable about a man who sowed in his vineyard. Then overnight, enemies came and sowed in the same vineyard. Now they wanted to uproot the weeds. After a while, when they discovered it, but they were asked to hold on for a while so that they both will grow together, and eventually they will separate them. And that's the reflection of this prayer. The Lord was waiting for the fullness of time for days of vengeance to be upon those who were actually against the spread of the gospel. So the prayers that are sent to God are prayers for vengeance. These people wanted justice, and the coming plagues that we see are actually a reflection as answers to their prayers. So we see where it says lightning and earthquake, darkness. Let's go back to that same place again. Let's do that first. That should be, yes. Verse 5, it says, and then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and threw it to the earth. And there were noises, thunderings, lightnings, and earthquake. All right, let's go back. So, when we think about clouds is a symbol of the presence of God. The cloud is the symbol of the presence of God. The glory cloud is also known as a Shekinah. Some people call it Shekinah glory. It symbolizes the coming judgment upon any given nation. It was reflected in the judgment against Babylon, in the judgment against Medes and Persia. You see the Lord coming on the clouds. And so we see that same, imagery brought up again in Revelation. Now, when God descended on Mount Sinai in Exodus 19, we see from verse 16 that on the morning of the third day, there was thunder, lightning, and thick cloud over the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast. You can see the similarities with this and that place we read, verse 5 of Revelation 18. Yeah, it's Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. In Psalm 18, it's written, in my distress I called to the Lord, I cried to my God for help. From his temple he heard my voice, my cry came before him into his ears. The earth trembled and quaked, and the fountains of the mountains shook. They trembled because he was angry. Smoke arose from his nostrils, consuming fire came from his mouth, burning coals blazed out of it. He parted the heavens and came down, dark clouds were under his feet. That you see, all these things you've seen here did not happen literally, but rather it's a reflection of God's action in a particular direction. So he mounted the cherubim and flew. He soared on the wings of the wind. He made darkness his covering, his canopy around him. The dark rains of the sky, out of the brightness of his presence clouds advance with hailstones and bolts of lightning. And the Lord thundered from heaven. The voice of the Most High resounded. He shot his arrows and scattered the enemy. With great bolts of lightning, he routed them. So, according to eyewitnesses, Rabbi Jonathan, an eyewitness of the Jewish war, the glory cloud or Shekinah departed from the temple at the start of that Jewish revolt in AD 66 and moved to the top of Mount Olive for 3.5 years until it rose up to heaven just before the arrival of Titus and his army in AD 70. So these are eyewitnesses' accounts that actually reflect these things as seen in the vision. So the glory cloud is believed to be the ever presence of the ever presence in the most holy place of the temple above the Ark of the Covenant. During the 6th century BC, before the destruction of Solomon's temple, Ezekiel also saw the glory cloud depart from the temple and travel east to the Mount of Olives, according to Ezekiel chapter 10, 18 to 19. And also, you can also check Ezekiel 11, 22 to 23. So John saw the same thing, that the glory cloud also, just the same way it happened in the vision in Ezekiel. There were eyewitnesses that saw these things happen too, just before the temple was destroyed in AD 70. So in the War of the Jews, Josephus records what appears to be the departure of the Shekinah glory or glory cloud from the most holy place. And it says, at the feast, which we call Pentecost of AD 66, as the priests were going by night into the temple, they felt a quaking and heard a great noise. And after that, they heard a sound as of a great multitude saying, oh, I didn't have it complete there. But what they said afterwards was about the glory has departed. The glory has departed. And they heard that. Okay. Now, the first trumpet of this is seventh plague of Exodus. What is the first trumpet? Hailstones. Hailstones. In Exodus 9, verse 23, God sent hail and fire upon the land of Egypt. Okay. This plague of hail and fire, like the first trumpet of Revelation, destroyed the plants and the trees of the land. The hail and fire and blood mentioned in this verse are probably the results of the Roman siege works. They were boulders launched by Roman catapults, which I'm going to show to us right now. Look at them. This is how big each boulder is. They were launched at the temple, thrown with a machinery. This is how the machine looks like. So they launched these stones to the buildings because the wall of Jerusalem was so thick and high, they could not enter in. So they had to find way to, get through. So they actually put these stones in a fire and launched it with this catapult. It looks something like this. It was going up, until they were able to, put a hole through the wall and actually penetrate the high fortress and enter into Jerusalem. Now, it sort of the earth was burnt, as mentioned in verse 7. and this reflects the Roman scorched earth policy. Now, Titus at the same time gave his soldiers leave to get into the suburbs of set the suburb on fire and ordered that they should bring timber and raise banks against the city. And so the trees were now cut off immediately. And what they did was that they went into the community around there and cut down trees until the ground became naked. Just the same way we see also when you reflect what happened in Revelation. All right, so when they actually uprooted the trees from around the area, it actually made the place very, very bare. And it's actually a reflection of what the Bible says that when they find out that the earth was burnt up, right? So we also see that there was a great mountain that was um, well, a great mountain of burning fire was thrown into the sea. All right, now what does that mean? Remember Matthew 21, verse 20, when disciples had a discussion with Jesus Christ about the fig tree. So he says, when the disciples saw it, they were marveled. How did the fig tree wither at once? Then Jesus answered them and said, truly I say to you, if you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what has been done to this fig tree, but even say to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, it will happen. So the fig tree itself is a symbol of self-righteousness, which is a product of religion. Jerusalem itself was reflected in this particular, event, in the sense that, in the sense that, when he met the fig tree for food, the fig tree could not offer anything, and it was cursed. Jesus came to Jerusalem and could not offer. It could not offer to him, and Jerusalem was like a fig tree bare. You know, John the Baptist was also saying at a certain time that bring forth fruits necessary for repentance. Jerusalem could not offer, you know, anything with all the religion, with everything that was going on in the temple. It offered nothing. So you should also know that mountains are also symbolic of the old covenant. Please mute your microphone. The mountain here is a reference to the old covenant. It speaks about Jerusalem, who was the Lord, was referred to as a mountain of the Lord. In John 4, you see the discussion with Jesus and the woman at the well, the Mount of Jerusalem and the Mount of Samaria. And it was Jesus was making it clear to the woman that Jerusalem would no longer be the mountain of the Lord, because it was now the embodiment of Sinai. And God was done with Sinai because he had moved to Zion. So this mountain called Jerusalem was that mountain on fire that was about to be thrown into the sea. Hebrews 12:18 says, for you have not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire with darkness and a gloom, and a tempest and the sound of a trumpet and a voice whose words made the hearers beg that further messages should not be spoken to them. Remember, this was how the law was given to them at the foot of the mountain. For they could not endure the order that was given. Even a beast touched the mountain, it should be stoned. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble with fear. But you have come to Mount Zion. So the author here was doing the comparison with two mountains, Mount Sinai and Mount Zion. But you have come to Mount Zion, the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to the innumerable angels in festival gathering. So Jerusalem was reflected as that mountain that was on fire being thrown into the sea. Jeremiah 51, verse 25, 42 is a prominent example of this symbolism. Now, mountains represent city, kingdom, while seas represent foreign conquerors. Look at this. It says, I am against you, you destroying mountain, referring to Babylon. You who destroy the whole earth, declares the Lord, I will stretch out my hand against you, roll off your cliffs, and make you a burnt out mountain. The sea will rise over Babylon. His roaring waves will cover her. This is exactly what was about to happen to Jerusalem. Remember, in the book of Revelation, Jerusalem was also destroyed, is described as Babylon. So just as Babylon was destroyed by the rising sea, which was represented by the foreign armies of Medes and Persians, Jerusalem was about to be destroyed by the sea of the Roman, you know, empire. Now we also see of a star, foreign star called wormwood, and comments in Hebraic understanding were actually ominous omens. The comments actually speak of bad things about to happen. In the words of the Jews, Jerusalem mentioned a comet ran across the sky for a whole year. Interesting. Now, wormwood is also a plant with a strong bitter flavor. That's why it gets its name. So, wormwood is a term used in the law and the prophets to warn Israel of a destruction as a punishment for apostasy because they were not faithful to covenant. So I'm going to give you some scriptures to prove that. Deuteronomy 29, verse 18, it says, so that there may not be among you man or woman or family or tribe whose heart turns away from the Lord our God to go and serve the God of all these nations, that there may not be among you a root bearing what? Bitterness or wormwood. Jeremiah 9:15. Therefore says the Lord of hosts, the Lord God of Israel, behold, I will feed them, these people, with wormwood and give them water of God to be drink. So the God of water of God also represents bitterness. Jeremiah 23, verse 15. Therefore says the Lord of hosts concerning the prophets, behold, I will feed them with wormwood and make them drink the water of God. For from the prophets of Jerusalem, profaneness has gone out into all the land. You see the comparison here. So whenever Israel was to go away from covenant, being unfaithful, wormwood and water of God was something that was to be released. Now Jesus drank water of God, and water of God symbolizes curses. When he drank it, any man in Christ, the curses will no longer come upon them. Paul explained this in Galatians. He says that the curse of the law will no longer be upon us because we have been delivered from the curse of the law. So, but the death deliverance from the curse of the law will be for those who are no longer under the law. But these guys refuse to, get themselves out of the law, and to this, they submitted to the law, to his blessing and the curses attached to it. So Israel became apostate and became Egypt and became Babylon. Then the plagues that were to come upon apostates are similar to those which were found as it happened to the Egyptians in the days of Moses. Revelation 8, verse 12, the fourth trumpet was blown, and it's a reflection of the ninth plague we see in the book of Exodus. And what is that plague? Darkness. Called the plague of darkness. Darkness signifies confusion and the absence of the presence of God. The presence of God had left the temple, and so darkness started invading the land. From the moment the cross happened, darkness started growing in the land. It started getting bad and bad and bad till the temple was destroyed. And from the time the cross happened, even you realize that the Jewish leadership became more confused. They're more concerned about their own sinister motive, hiding, scheming, started becoming so ugly that they were not concerned about God's plan, but about their own selfish plan and ambition. And this was what eventually led to the arrival of the ego. That's as mentioned in that last class we read. Let me just go back there. That is verse. Yeah. It says, verse 12. Then the fourth angel sounded, and the third of the sun was struck, third of the moon was, and third of the stars, so that a third of them were darkened, and the third of the day did not shine. Likewise, the night. So it did not shine in day, and no light at night. And I looked and heard an angel flying through the midst, saying with a loud voice, "Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth." The actual translation from the Greek is actually inhabitants of the land, because of the remaining blasts of the trumpets of the three angels are about to sound. So let's move back. So it says in verse 12, then I looked and I heard an eagle flying directly overhead, proclaiming the loud voice, "Woe, woe to those who live on the land because of the remaining sounds of the trumpets of the three angels about to blow them." Do you see that? I heard an eagle flying directly above, proclaiming. The eagle is actually the sign of the Roman identity. Interestingly, the prophecy was so accurate, so accurate. Now, let me tell you how accurate it can become. It can be Deuteronomy 28, verse 49, which is over 1,000 years before this happened. The Lord will raise up a distant nation against you, one from the other side of the earth, as the eagles flies, and the nation whose language you will not understand. Include there one from the other side of the earth as the eagles flies. Matthew 28, verse 24, verse 28. It says, "For where the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered." This is Jesus' response when they asked him, "Where will," because he told them one will be taken, one will left behind, and they asked where. So wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. So this was like just the prophecy was directly speaking about the Roman invasion. The prophecy identified exactly who would attack Israel, which nation, and how they would attack Israel. So the prayers of the saints led to a particular um, time where these things were to be fulfilled. The timing, which was would be shortly, affecting the Jews on the first century and directly affecting the Jews in Jerusalem because they had started prostituting and refused to enter into covenants and were going about fighting against God's plan, trying to destroy Jesus by destroying the church. And at the end of the day, what did they get? Judgment. And that judgment was necessary to wipe out that generation and wipe out that old administration so that the new covenant would be established. Jesus would be revealed as Messiah upon the destruction of that old covenant age so that the new will be established and progress. All right, thank you for your time today. This is all we have to share today. God bless you. Thank you for your time. Have a wonderful time with your family and yourself.